Good morning, my 111 students. So this video is discussing how to post the journal entries in the general ledger. Rule 1 in the preparation of the posting to the general ledgers is to prepare the general ledgers following the sequence of the chart of accounts of the company before posting. After that, after the preparation of the general ledgers, you have to label each general ledger as to the account title. It's the date, the debit on the left side, and credit on the right side. Number 3 is to transfer the information from the journal to the general ledger, placing the amount in the same manner stated in the journal. For example, if the amount is found on the debit side, then you transfer it on the general ledger of that account also on the debit side of the general ledger, and also transfer the date. After transferring the amount in the same side, do not forget to fill up the reference column of the journal where it came from. And then, as you transfer the general journal entries into the general ledger one by one, so you also place in the general journal the GL page where you transferred the general journal entries. After transferring all of the general journal entries to the general ledger, so you are done posting each of the amounts in the general journal in the ledger where they are placed on the same side. So you have to put the general ledger debit and credit. So total the debits and also total the credits. And then deduct the debit amount, total debit amount with the total credit amount. And the balance, so the balance will be either a debit balance or a credit balance. So if the sum of an account's credit is greater than the sum of the debits, so the balance should be placed on the credit side, and that is called as credit balance. So if the total debits is greater than the total credits, then the amount is called the debit balance, and it shall be placed on the debit side. After finding the general ledger balances, you will prepare the trial balance. So to prepare the trial balance, of course, write the heading, which is composed of the name of the company, then the name of the report, which is trial balance, then the date of the report, say for example, December 31, 2021. And then write the account titles and also their balances, with whether it's a debit or a credit balance. So that is the trial balance. And at the end of the amounts for each account titles, total the debits and also total the credits. So the total debits and total credits must be equal. That is why it is called a trial balance. So to illustrate from general journal to posting to the general ledger and also the preparation of the trial balance, let us answer this illustration. So during March 2019, the first month of operations, various financial transactions took place. March 1, Fortalejo started its business by depositing 350,000 in a bank account in the name of Fortalejo Graphics Design at BPI. So analyzing this is initial investment of the owner, who is Mr. Fortalejo. So to record investment, the debit is cash and the credit is Fortalejo Capital. So to write the debit and credit in an entry form, you first write the debit account title and also the amount. Then, followed by the credit, which is to be indented from the debit. So, this, you do not have to write debit or credit. This format is understood that the one that is written first is the debit account title. and the one that is indented is the credited account title. So as you can notice, debit must always be equal with the credit amount. March 5. Computer equipment costing 145,000 is acquired on a cash basis. So we are analyzing this transaction and we will prepare the entry. So the equipment of the company increased. So we debit computer equipment 145,000 because the increased side of assets is debit side. And we will credit cash because the company's cash decreased. So credit cash 145,000. So this is pro forma journal entry. And later after this, we will transfer this journal entry in the formal books of accounts, which is the general journal. So after analyzing all transactions, we will have the proper format of the general journal. March 9. Computer supplies in the amount of 25,000 are purchased on account. So in here, computer supplies increased. So to increase assets, you debit computer supplies 25,000. And because this is purchased on account, so the cash of the company did not decrease, but the liabilities increased. So debit credit accounts payable 25,000. March 11. Fortalejo Graphics Design collected 88,000 in cash for designing websites. So it rendered services to customers for cash. Therefore, this is income. So we debit cash 88,000 because cash increased. And we credit service income 88,000, which is the reason why the company received cash. March 16. Fortalejo paid 18,000 to Jewel, a one-stop bills payment service company for semi-monthly utilities. So payment of expenses. So therefore in here, cash is decreased. So to decrease an asset is to place it on the credit side. That is why we place cash on the credit side of 18,000. And the account title debited is the amount so paid. So the account that is being paid is utilities expense. So we debit utilities expense 18,000. March 17. The entity has service agreements with several entrepreneurs to maintain and update their websites weekly. Fortalejo billed these clients 35,000 for services already rendered during the month. So here, the services are already rendered. So therefore, this is income. But the cash is not yet received. So this is collectibles from customers. So therefore, we will debit accounts receivable because accounts receivable is the account title that represents collectible from customers. And then credit service income because this is the reason why we have collectible from customers. Next, March 19. Fortalejo made a partial payment of 17,000 for the March 9 purchases on account. Purchase on account, I think that this was the purchase of supplies on account. So paying an account decreases liability. So to decrease a liability is to place it on the debit side. So we debit accounts payable 17,000 and credit cash 17,000. So we place cash on the credit side because cash decreased. So to decrease an asset is to place it on the credit side. March 20. Checks totaling 25,000 were received from clients for billings dated March 17. So this means that the company has collected from customers the accounts receivable. So the company received cash. So debit cash 25,000 because cash increased. And credit accounts receivable 25,000 because in this time, accounts receivable decreased because the customers made their payments to the company. March 21. Fortalejo withdraw 20,000 from the business for personal use. So every time Fortalejo withdraw something from the business, so drawing increases. Therefore, we debit drawing. So Fortalejo drawing 20,000 and credit what is being withdrawn by Fortalejo. So in this is cash. So credit cash 20,000. March 27. Blanche Publishing submitted a bill to Portalejo for 8,000 worth of newspaper advertisements for this month. Portalejo will pay the bill next month. So this means an unpaid advertising expense. So this is debit advertising expense and credit accrued advertising expense or advertising payable. So the expense is already incurred, but it is not yet paid, so that's why it's accrued. So this is payable next month. So accrued expenses are liabilities. So we place it on the credit side because in here liabilities increased. March 31. Fortalejo paid his assistant designer salaries of 15,000 for the month. So therefore, salary is already incurred and then also paid. So this is salaries expense 15,000 and credit cash 15,000. Cash decreased because Fortalejo, the owner of the business, already paid the salaries of his employee. So to prepare the general journal, those account titles that we debit and credit, actually, if we are only trying to answer what is being asked, that what is the debit and what is the credit, we can have that one. But the books of accounts, which is the general journal, has actually this format. So we have the date column, the account titles column, the folio, the debit amount, and the credit amount. So the entries we provided on the previous slides were written here on our books of accounts um, in proper format. So we place the date on the date column, then the account titles, debit cash, credit for Teleho Capital, and of course, we have to provide brief description of the transaction. So for example, the first transaction was an initial investment of the owner. So we can write the explanation as initial investment. And then the amount debited is to be placed on the debit column and the amount of credit is to be placed on the credit column. Then before writing the second journal entry, you have to place one space blank. So one space blank. Then we have the transaction on March 5. So that was debit computer equipment, credit cash. So debit amount 145,000 and credit amount 145,000. So the brief description was bought equipment for cash. Then one space before to proceed another entry. So March 9, computer supplies, credit accounts payable. So the brief transaction explanation, bought supplies on account. Debit amount 25,000, credit amount 25,000. On March 11, our entry was debit cash and credit service income 88,000. So we placed on the debit amount 88,000 and credit amount 88,000. Our brief explanation, rendered service for cash. On March 16, our entry analyzed was utilities expense, debit 18,000, cash 18,000 credit, then explanation, paid semi-monthly utilities. Leave one space before writing the next journal entry. So March 17, we have accounts receivable, service income, debit amount 35,000, credit amount 35,000. The brief description of the transaction, billed clients for services. Pwede ring build clients for services on account. March 19, our entry was debit accounts payable 17,000 and cash 17,000, and this was the transaction is a partial payment of accounts payable. Then leave one space before writing the entry on March 20. Debit cash 25,000 and credit accounts receivable 25,000. The transaction description, as we read the transaction on the previous slide, it was described as actually collection of accounts. 21. Fortalejo drawing 20,000 and credit cash 20,000. Brief description is withdrawal of owner. Then leave one space our transaction on March 27, we analyzed it as debiting advertising expense 8,000 and credit accrued advertising expense 8,000. And our brief explanation is the unpaid advertising. Leave one space before writing March 31 transaction entry. Salaries expense 15,000 and credit cash 15,000. Then that was the general journal. That is our first book of accounts. The second book of account is the general ledger. So the process of transferring from the general journal to the general ledger is called the posting process or the posting to the general ledger. So we prepare the general ledger and then write the account name of the general ledger such as cash, accounts receivable, supplies, computer equipment, and so on. Then of course the headings of the columns, and then before we transfer the amounts, whether it was debited or credited. So for example, we post all the entries for cash. So here are the entries for cash. So we write it the dates. So postings were made to cash as follows from our general journal. So on general journal, March 1 date, we have debited cash of 350,000. So that's why our reference here is journal page 1. Okay. Next for cash is on March 5, may credit siya na 145,000. So still this was in journal page 1. So the numbering is based on my paging of the general journal slide, the first slide, the second slide, the third slide for our general journal discussion of the books of accounts. So that's it. Next, on March 11, on slide 2 of my general journal, debited 88,000 for cash. So that's why our reference is journal 2, journal-2. Next is March 16, we credited 18,000. So from that journal entry, we will place, because cash has been credited, so we will also place it on the credit side. Then place the reference. On March 20, cash is debited. This is actually collection of accounts on March 20 for our journal entry. So that's J, page 3. On March 19, this is actually the transaction which is partial payment of accounts payable. So we credited cash 17,000. That is journal page 3. Next, on March 21, the transaction credit to cash 20,000. This is actually our transaction which represents the withdrawal of the owner. So from journal-4 or journal page 4. And lastly, on March 31, our last entry, we credit cash 15,000 for the salary of the employee. So that's why we also transfer it on the credit side, because on that entry, cash has been credited. After posting all entries for cash, so we will total the debit. So 350,000 plus 80,000 plus 25,000 is equal to 463,000. And we will also total the credits, 145,000 plus 18,000 plus 17,000 plus 20,000 plus 15,000 is equal to 215,000. To get the balance, we deduct total debits with total credits. So 463,000 minus 215,000 is equal to 248,000 debit balance. And you may place a double rule. That means this is the final amount or balance of our cash. Then our general ledger for accounts receivable. So accounts receivable on March 17, on journal entry, page 3, we have debited accounts receivable for 35,000 for the client's bill, billing the clients for services already rendered. And on March 20, this credit of 25,000 represents the amount credited for the accounts that is already collected. So this is journal book slide 3 of the general journal. Okay, so 35,000 minus 25,000 of credit. So the debit balance of accounts receivable is 10,000. Computer equipment. So we only have one entry for our one posting for our computer equipment, because also in our general journal book, we also have only one journal entry for computer equipment affecting the computer equipment. So it was on March 5 where the company bought computer equipment. So it was debited for 145,000, and that was in journal page slide 1. So that's why J-1. Computer supplies. Computer supplies also has only one entry on our journal book. So that was on March 9, slide number 2. So that's why we have reference from journal dash 2 or journal page 2. So debit amount was 25,000. So you can also already place a double rule for the 25,000 because this is the final balance of your computer supplies. Accounts payable. So accounts payable, on March 9, we had credited 25,000. So this was on the supplies button account. So that is on the journal page 2, slide number 2 of my general journal. So that's credit accounts payable. And then on March 19, the company paid partially the accounts payable. So that's why we credited cash there amounting to 17,000. So since accounts payable is debit on that entry, so we place that 17,000 accounts payable on here debit side. So the source or the reference is journal page 3. So we have 17,000 minus 25,000, so we get 8,000. And since credit side is higher, so we place the balance on the credit side. And then you write double rule here. Double rule means dalawang dash, 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 dash. Equals, equals, equals. So that's double rule. Accrued advertising. So on our journal entries, we only have one entry for accrued advertising that was on March 27, and it was a credit for 8,000. So we place it on the credit side, 8,000. And the reference is journal page 4. X capital. So X capital, we only have one entry there on March 1, the initial investment of Portalejo. So that was journal page 1 amounting to 350,000. It was credited, so please transfer also on the credit side. X drawing. So once only was X drawing was affected among our entries. That was March 21 when Portalejo withdraw 20,000. So it was debited. Therefore, we place the 20,000 also on the debit side. And the reference is from journal slide number 4. Service income. So service income, on March 11, there was a services that is provided for by cash. So service income on that date was credited. So that's why we also put credit 88,000 here. And on March 17, service income again also is credited. So from that journal entry, credit service income 35,000. So we post also on the credit side. Then 88 plus 35,000, that's 123,000. So double rule because this is now our final amount for service income. So we have a credit balance. Utilities expense. So March 16 is the only transaction affecting our account title, which is utilities expense, and it was for a debit amount of 18,000. So that's why we post it on the debit side also. And double rule because this is your final balance for utilities expense. Advertising expense. So we also have one transaction only affecting our advertising expense that was dated March 27 of our journal book. So on page or slide number 4. So debit amount was 8,000. That's why we also post it on the debit side here in our account title, General Ledger Advertising Expense. Salaries expense, the last entry on our journal book was March 31, which debited salaries expense. So that's why we also post here on the debit side 15,000 for salaries expense. And the reference or source is from journal page 4. Next, after finding the balances of your general ledger, so we have now to prepare the trial balance. So the trial balance, the first is the heading on top of the report and centered. So for example, Loveray Company trial balance March 31, 2019. So this must be written on top of your trial balance. And so that's why I did not write it here because the space will run short. So but actually if you have it, the trial balance heading should be here on top centered. So it can be seen one paper on a bond paper. So that's it. But if the company has so much account titles, so it can be 2 pages, 3 pages. How many pages as long as the account titles are written completely. So the preparation of the trial balance, of course, as I said a while ago, the heading, the three column heading because of the name, date, and then the name of the report. So then after that, account titles, so list down the account titles with balances. So cash, accounts receivable, computer supplies, computer equipment, accounts payable, accrued advertising expense, Portalejo capital, Portalejo drawing, service income, utilities expense, advertising expense, salaries expense, and then if you are done enumerating all the account titles with balances, you place total. So the enumeration of your account titles in the trial balance is not it should be arranged. So it should be arranged in accordance with your assets. So current assets, non-current assets. After then, current liabilities, then non-current liabilities. Then capital, then drawing, then lahat ng income followed by expenses. So that should be the arrangement. I repeat, you write it current assets, non-current assets, current liabilities, non-current liabilities, then capital, drawing, tapos unahin ilista lahat ng income bago lahat ang expenses. Then on the debit column, you write the account titles balances. So if what is the balance of the account title, you place on the debit or credit side. Say for example, our cash has a debit balance of 240,000. So that's why we place it on the debit side. Accounts receivable also has a debit side, debit balance of 10,000. Computer supplies, 25,000 debit balance. Computer equipment, 145,000 debit balance. Then accounts payable has a credit balance, so we place it also here in the trial balance on the credit side. Accrued advertising expense also had the credit balance, so place it on the trial balance credit side. Portalejo capital, credit balance, 350,000. Portalejo drawing, it was a debit balance, so place it on the debit side here in the trial balance. Service income was credit balance, so place on the debit and the credit side, 123,000. Utilities expense, debit balance, 18,000. Advertising expense, 8,000, debit balance. Salaries expense, 15,000, debit balance. Then, if all the accounts are considered, so add the total debits and also add the total credits. So, adding 248,000 plus 10,000 plus 25,000 plus 145,000 plus 20,000 plus 18,000 plus 8,000 plus 15,000 is equal to 489,000. For the credits, we add 8,000 plus 3,000 plus 350,000 plus 123,000. So that's total 489,000. So as you can see, debit is equal to credit. So this is why it is called trial balance. If your trial balance is not balanced, so there is something wrong with it. So you go back to your general ledger and see to it that you have really written the balances correctly. Or you really have find the balance of each account correctly.